Good morning, everyone, especially neighborhood kids. I'm so glad you're here today to hear another story from God's Word, the Bible, which we know is absolutely true and completely trustworthy. We have been walking through the Old Testament, and we have seen how God has raised up a people for himself. We call them the Israelites. They are the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and we have gone with them to Egypt and back, and now we are here with them in the promised land. We also learned that in the book of Judges, God had sent 12 judges to help the Israelites when they cried out to him, and God always saved them. After the book of Judges, we have the book of Ruth. And it is the story of a Gentile woman. She was not Jewish. She was not an Israelite. And God is going to use her in a very mighty way because she chose to live like a devoted fan of God. If you will turn to Ruth chapter 1, in verse 1, we read that there was a terrible famine in the land of Bethlehem, in the land of Judah. And there was a man who lived there. His name was Elimelech. And Elimelech had a wife named Naomi. They also had 2 sons. And during this famine, Elimelech looked at them and he's like, you know what, I don't think we can live here anymore. Food's not growing. We need to move. And we're going to move to the country of Moab. So he picked up his family and he took them up here from Bethlehem, around the Dead Sea, to the country of Moab. Do you remember our other ice cream cone? We had 4 countries, Midian, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And he has gone to Moab to live, which we can find over here on the other side of our map. Well, while the family was living in Moab, we read that Elimelech died. We read that the 2 sons got married. They married Moabite women, and they were living there in the land. And after about 10 years, the 2 sons also died. And there were 3 women, Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, with no way to support themselves because back then you really needed your husbands and your sons to take care of you. And so Naomi had also heard that God had come to the aid of the people living in Judah, that famine was over, and she decided that she was going to return to Bethlehem. And she told her 2 daughters her plan, that she wanted to move back. But she also gave them a choice. She said, you know, the custom is that you could go back to your fathers, and your fathers could find you new husbands because you're young. And Orpah said, I'll take you up on that, and I'll go back to my father. But Ruth said, Naomi, I'm going with you. I want to serve your God. Listen to what Naomi said. She said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you sleep, I will sleep. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and I will be buried. May the Lord do to me and more, if anything but death parts us. Well, that was a very strong promise. But what was Ruth doing? She was promising to be a devoted fan of Naomi's God, the God of Israel. So the 2 women walked back to Bethlehem. It was about 60 miles for them to walk from Moab around back here. And they did that, and when they got back, the women of the town were so excited to see Naomi. They had not seen her for a long time, and they welcomed her back. So Naomi and Ruth began living in Bethlehem. They didn't have any men to go get jobs, and they could not go out and get jobs. So Ruth would go to the fields, and she would practice gleaning. Gleaning meant that when they were harvesting the barley, which was going on at this time. Sometimes they would drop some stalks on the ground, and the poor people could come along and pick those up and take them home and eat them. And that was how God provided for the poor people of Israel, by having that law. So Ruth would be in the fields gleaning. Well, one day she met the master of the fields. His name was Boaz. And Boaz took very good care of her. He invited her to come eat with the other workers in the field. He said, please get a drink out of our jars. And he made sure that there was plenty of barley for Ruth to pick up each day and take home. And one day Ruth asked him, why do you favor me? Why are you being so nice to me? And he said, you know what? I have heard that you left your little g gods of Moab and you're following the one true God. I've heard that you are helping your mother-in-law Naomi, and I want to help you too because you are doing those good things. Well, Ruth continued to glean in those fields through the entire barley harvest, which was a few months. And near the end, her mother-in-law Naomi said, I need to tell you something else. We have a law in Israel about the kinsman redeemer. And that law says that the man who is the closest relative to Elimelech should buy our property and marry you. And you need to go ask Boaz, because Boaz is that man. And so Ruth followed those instructions, and she went to Boaz, and Boaz agreed. He even went to the city gate where all the business was conducted to make sure that it was legal. And Ruth and Boaz were married. Over time, Ruth gave birth to a little boy named Obed. And Naomi was especially happy. Naomi had come back to Bethlehem with no husband and no children and no grandchildren, and now she has a son-in-law and a grandson. And the women of Bethlehem praised God for that. That little boy grew up to be a man. His name was still Obed. Obed had a son named Jesse. Jesse had many sons, and you probably know one of them. His name was David, and he slew a giant Goliath. These were some famous sons. He would go on to be the king of Israel. There was one more very famous son that came from the marriage of Boaz and Ruth, and that was Jesus. If you read in Matthew chapter 1, you'll see that Jesus came from those descendants. You know, without Jesus, who came to earth for the purpose of giving his life because of our sin, those wrong things that we think and do and say, his blood was shed so that if we choose, we can be forgiven. And we can follow the one true God of Israel, just like Ruth did. We can be devoted fans of God also.